So in today's video we will be talking about use context hook. We have already discussed a few of the hooks. In our previous videos we have already talked about some of the hooks. So today we will be talking about the use context. So used context hook is used to create common data that can be accessed throughout the component hierarchy without passing the props down manually to each level. Context defined will be available to all the child components without involving props. According to the React's official web page, in a typical React application, data is passed top down, that is parent to child, via props. But this can be cumbersome for certain types of props. For example, locale preference, UI theme, that are required by many components within an application. Context provides a way to share values like these between components without having to explicitly pass a props through every level of the tree. Context provides a way to pass data through the component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. So today we will be focusing on how use context works programmatically. But before, we must first understand how to make data available from parent to child component using props attributes. So we have done that already in a last of a few videos, so you can check that out. We have a complete playlist for React.js beginners. If we use too much of props while passing the components, then we will have some of the problems, and we will discuss that in detail. So the first thing is the state data that is defined at the top level. The defined data is passed to the child component where the data is not getting used again. So the data from the parent is passed as props data, and this props data has no impact on the child component. But still, the child component needs to maintain the props data. Next, if we have a child component, so that further passes this props data to the sub child component, and the child component here maintains an overhead to manage the props from the parent component. So just to make it available to the further child component. Third thing is that we need to explicitly keep passing the props to even those components which do not use it only to make the data available to the hierarchy below. We are maintaining the overhead of constantly passing the props data throughout the entire hierarchy. So now we have use context for the rescue. So in order to solve all of the listed problems of passing props data to even those components which do not require it, only because the data is required in the further hierarchy, we can use the context APIs. Context APIs enable us to define the context object which stores some data and will make it available throughout the hierarchy without passing the data as props. To simplify, Context provides a container containing some data and making it available to the entire hierarchy of components below. So useContext is an amazing way to remove the overhead of passing the data via props to the different levels in the hierarchy even if it is not required. We have already seen some of the other React hooks. So today let's work on with useContext. Context is designed to share data that can be considered as global data for a tree of React components, such as the current authenticated user or theme. So context API use context, provider and context. Consumer components pass down the data, but it is very cumbersome to write the long functional code to use this context API. So use context hook helps to make the code more readable, less verbose, and removes the need to introduce consumer component. So in the last few videos we have been introducing the consumer component. So in today's video we will be getting rid of that. The use context hook is the new addition in the React 16.8 and above versions. Talking about the syntax, it has a simple syntax that is const name of the context. So we are calling it auth context and then use context with the initial value as the argument. The use context accepts the value provided by React dot create context and then re-renders the component whenever its value changes. But you can still optimize its performance by using memorization. So in today's example, we are going to have a button. Whenever we click on the button, the on-click handler is getting triggered and it changes the authentication status, that is, it has a default value of no. So with the help of use context hook, it will change the authentication status. So inside my components folder, I am going to create a new file and I will call it auth context.js. So first I am going to import React from React, and then we will create our const auth context and assign it to React dot create context. Here creating the context object and passing the default values. So we will insert the default values here. First is status. This is initially set to null, and next is the login, which is set to an empty string. Now we will export default our component auth context. Now we will go to our app.js and we will be modifying it a little. So we do not need all this, so we'll just remove this. Instead of function, we will be calling const. We will be creating one more component inside the components folder. This is called auth.js. So here again import React from React. Along with React, we are going to call the useContext hook. And we are going to import auth context from auth context. Now we'll create the const auth and then const auth assigning it to useContext, and we will pass the auth context as the argument. Auth context. And we will add a console.log statement which will tell us the status of the auth. Next we will be adding the return. So this return will have a div and an h1 which says are you authenticated, and it is going to display the auth status after this. So auth.status, and then it is going to check. So I'm adding a p tag and then yes you are, or else it will just display a p tag with no. Now we will add a button with an on click which has auth.login, and we will right click to login. Lastly, we will export default the component auth. Now going back to app.js, we will import auth from auth.js, and then we will also import auth context from auth-context. Now we will be having a const first is auth status and then set status. Set auth status, and then we will be calling the use state hook. And it will initially be set to false. Next is const login. Here set auth status will be true. Inside the return, we will be calling the provider, auth context dot provider. It has a value so the status is set to auth status and the login is set to login. Now we'll be adding auth. So this is all about the file. Now we will save this file and then we will see the output. So now let us start our server and let us see the output. So npm start. So we are getting the exact output. That is the first question, are you authenticated, and the initial value of no. We have also added a console.log statement, so let us go ahead and inspect that. So initially it is false. Now if we click on login, then it changes to yes you are, and it also changes to true. So this is all about the function of clicking. If I render it again, then again we will get the false, and then click to login, so true. So that was it about today's video. Stay tuned for more tutorials for React.js beginners, and I'll see you in the next video.